So without further ado, I'm going to get this show on the road because I know that you've all been waiting to hear from our keynote speaker. I'm proud to say he's a friend. He's not only a friend of mine, he's a friend of the Citizens Campaign, and when we're finished tonight, he's going to be a friend of every one of yours because he's going to show you how to find the waste in your community and do something about it. Everybody, please welcome Matt Boxer.
Thank you all very much. It's good to see so many people turn out for this really great event. Thank you, Harry, for the kind introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here this evening. I want to thank the Citizens Campaign for holding this very important forum and others like it, and for encouraging New Jersey residents to empower themselves and get involved in their government, especially in their local government. You know, in making our local governments work better and cost less, we need the help of all of you in this room. When you add up the number of towns and school districts and local authorities and commissions, fire districts and similar agencies in New Jersey, what you find is that there are nearly 2,000 units of government in this state. And it's really an astounding number for a state that geographically is as small as ours. We have another layer of government, another unit of government in New Jersey every 4 square miles. And so monitoring that much government is not something that we at the Office of the State Comptroller are able to do simply all by ourselves. It's an effort that requires the work of well-intentioned people all across this state, and especially those of you in this room. So let me start by saying thank you again to all of you for being here and for committing to be part of the solution in making New Jersey a more affordable place to live. So that then brings us to the key question. How do we find ways for local government to operate more efficiently and more economically, particularly during these tough budget times? Tonight, what I'd like to do is pass along to you some of the questions that my office has asked various government agencies that have led to concrete taxpayer savings and efficiencies. These are questions that we've raised in particular audits or projects that we're working on, but they are applicable to the operation of government all across this state. So, as many of you know, one of the main cost drivers for local government is health insurance. Providing health insurance for government employees is, simply put, very, very expensive. But some health coverage options are more affordable than others. Local governments do not need to give their employees a Cadillac health plan, especially when those health plans are being funded by taxpayers, like all of us in this room. So one question that all of us in this room can ask our local government officials as we become more and more active in the affairs of our local governments is, are they considering more affordable options for health care coverage? Most significantly, are they considering membership in the state health benefits plan? And I'll tell you why we've focused on that particular question and what we found when we have. We had conducted an audit of the New Jersey Turnpike Authority, which is where this issue first came up. And what we learned in the course of that audit is that that agency could have saved literally millions of dollars annually if it had simply chosen to participate in the state health benefits plan that all state workers belong to, instead of using a private carrier for health insurance. Let me give a little bit of background on this. If you're a state worker, you're in the state health benefits plan. On the local government level, you have an option as a government entity. You can choose to participate in the state plan, or you can hire a broker and use a private plan instead. What we decided to do after we looked at those issues at the Turnpike Authority was see how many towns and counties are not using the state plan. So it turns out that there are 14 counties and 217 municipalities that are not in the state health benefits plan. We picked 4 of those entities, more or less randomly, and found that 3 of those entities hadn't even evaluated the merits of being in the state health plan as opposed to the private plan that they were participating in. So what we did is we did an evaluation ourselves. And what we found is that all 4 of those entities that we looked at that were not in the state plan would have achieved savings for taxpayers if they had been. Collectively, over the 2-year period we looked at, those 4 entities alone would have saved $12.5 million for taxpayers simply by participating in the state health benefits plan. Now, why is the state health benefits plan frequently less expensive? You get economies of scale by joining the state plan, and the state plan does not include or involve paying a broker. There's no need to pay a broker because the state runs the plan. So those are 2 significant reasons why the state plan is frequently less expensive. The issue of use of a broker also starts to explain why some local towns don't use the state plan, even though economically they should. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but first let me just note, at $12.5 million for 4 local governments, you add that up, across local government in New Jersey, there's a lot of potential savings to be had just by asking this very simple question of, well, have you considered using the state health benefits plan? Since we released the report, which goes back a few months now, 20 local governments have already opted to switch to the state plan. So we're making progress, but we can do better. And one thing that we could certainly use is the help of all of you in this room. Keep the pressure on. Keep the pressure on just by asking. Go to local government, town council meetings and the like, and ask them, are you in the state health benefit plan? Well, why not? Going back to the broker issue that I started to mention a moment ago, one of the reasons that we need to keep the pressure on is so that local officials aren't being swayed by arguments of insurance brokers. Now, under private health insurance plans, brokers get a cut of the fees that are being paid. But they get, as I mentioned before, they get nothing under the state plan. So we know what they're going to be pushing for. I mean, once a local government hires a broker, there's very little chance the broker is going to push them into the state plan because it's human nature. They want to get paid. One of the things that we've seen as we've looked at local governments throughout the state is these brokers have a degree of sway in many of our local governments that many folks just don't realize. You know, a lot of folks have a vision of their mayor and their council members calling the shots. In some towns it's like that, and in other towns it's not. And so that's why it takes the efforts of all of us in this room to keep the pressure on and ask these questions about how do you look for possible savings in this area. One recent investigation we conducted of the Delaware River Port Authority found that that agency was paying some brokers for not doing any work at all. They were using toll dollars as part of this wasteful scheme in which the brokers were sharing more than $1 million in insurance commissions with other brokers who hadn't performed any corresponding services. Payments were being made not in the interest of toll payers or in the interest of public, but for other reasons, political reasons and other reasons that really had nothing to do with the interest of toll payers. I'm happy to report that by us keeping the pressure on at the Delaware River Port Authority, they've ended that commission sharing arrangement. They've replaced it with a competitive broker selection process that they're now reporting is going to save them about $500,000 a year. So that's good news. And this is an issue that the Citizens Campaign has focused on for a long period of time now, and rightly so. And so in this discussion of what can we be asking our local officials, that's one issue to be focused on. What kind of health coverage, health plan are you using and why? Here's another very simple question to ask your local government officials that that is simple, but has led to some extraordinary answers when we've asked it. And that question is, how much are you paying your employees? As I say, it seems simple, but when you ask that question, or you're looking at the records of local government budgetary issues and the like, make sure you get the complete answer when you ask that question. If your local government comes back and they're just telling you salary information, your response should be something like, nice try, but I want to know the total amount you're paying. Not just the salary, but the total amount you're paying. Because what we found at various levels of government, both at the state level and the local level, is that those stated salaries that we frequently see often do not include numerous forms of hidden compensation. So let me give a couple of very concrete examples. I mentioned the Turnpike Authority before. Let me go back to them again for an example. When we did our audit of the Turnpike Authority, our auditors found that over a period of 2 years, authority employees and management were granted a total of about $30 million in bonuses not based on performance. And so you're thinking like, well, what kind of bonuses is he talking about here? Well, the bonuses ranged across the spectrum. Some of the bonuses were being paid were birthday bonuses. People were getting money beyond their salary for working on their birthday. I don't know how many of you in this room ever got a bonus financially for working on your birthday. I know that I never did. But at the Turnpike Authority, everybody had the happiest birthday you've ever seen. The Turnpike Authority was also paying, they were paying both retention bonuses and separation bonuses. So they were paying their employees to stay and they're paying their employees to go. The cumulative effect of these bonuses in some instances was really dramatic. And I'm not going to suggest that in every local government you'd see these dramatic numbers. But let me just give you a sense at the Turnpike Authority of what we saw so you understand why I'm raising this issue. One example was we looked at a property inspector whose annual salary was $73,000 a year, which sounds like it's a reasonable salary for a property inspector. But going back to what I said before, when you ask this question, make sure you find out what the total amount paid was. Because in a year that that property inspector retired, he actually received a little bit more than $73,000. He received $321,000 when all the payouts and bonuses were included. So I'm happy to report the Turnpike Authority has changed, made a lot of changes, renegotiated their bargaining agreements with toll collectors to bring some of this to an end. But these are questions worth asking. We've seen these other these similar issues even in compensation of community college presidents. And very glad that the college here is hosting us today. I don't want to get quickly ushered out of the room or anything. But what we found is what we found. What we found with the compensation of community college presidents was things like the taxpayers paying for relocation costs for a president's pet, housing allowances that reached as high as $3,500 a month, annual retirement contributions that in one case were 14 times the amount required by statute. So there are egregious examples across the board. But I've got to say one of the more astounding examples of compensation issues that we've encountered was actually at the state government level in the form of clothing allowances being paid to state employees. Now, I don't know about you guys, who knew that state workers were getting clothing stipends on top of their salaries? And you know, it's another question worth asking at the local government level as well. The report that we did and the inquiry that we did on this was interesting because what we found was that about half of the state employees who were getting this clothing allowance were not even wearing special clothing. They were people like press officers, communications folks, and other folks with desk jobs. So these are not people who are getting their clothing soiled. New Jersey pays about $700 a year, or used to. That number, after our report was issued, that number got decreased. But New Jersey was paying more than any other state that we looked at. They weren't asking for any kind of receipt to document any expenses that were being reimbursed. Now it's been changed with the new collective bargaining agreement at the state level that we think is going to save about $3 million annually. Another compensation issue that's going to continue to have a long-term impact and is worth focusing on and looking at the operation of our local government is the issue of taxpayer-funded pensions. We recently looked at this issue and we found that the state's pension system really is filled with participants receiving pension credits they're not entitled to. The state law on this issue is pretty clear. Pension system is for government employees. It's not for independent contractors who are working at private firms and providing services to the government as a vendor. Yet what we found were a string of, there's a few more seats up front, feel free to come up. What we found was a string of professional contractors who are employed at places like law firms. And some of these folks, they're senior partners at law firms who are also receiving multiple public pensions as part of their compensation for the legal work that they're providing to local governments. We found, for example, one attorney who was enrolled in the pension system for his work in 6 different municipalities as a public defender, despite the fact that he also had a private law practice. So when you look at these folks and you say, well, these folks, they're partners at large law firms. The towns are not their employer, the towns are their client. You know, you could draw like a private sector analogy. You know, I worked at a law firm. We represented large corporations and did their legal work, but you know, I could tell you that Microsoft or Amazon, they're not putting their outside counsel in their pension plan. And when particular towns, school boards are hiring outside lawyers, they shouldn't put them in their pension plan either. Those folks are vendors. They're being procured under the local public contracts law. They are not employees. And so that's another basic, simple question to pose to government entities throughout the state. You know, it's interesting, in some of the cases that we looked at, the local governments had opted to keep their attorney enrolled in the pension system based on the legal advice that was provided by the very attorney whose eligibility was at issue. So, I mean, I don't know what kind of scam we're talking about here. I guess, you know, everybody checks their common sense at the door when they go to work for government, because, I mean, yeah, picture that. Like, you approach your lawyer and you say, hey, are you properly in the pension system? And what is the lawyer going to say? Like, yeah, sure, I'm pretty comfortable with being in the pension system, and of course that was the answer that they got. So we referred 202 names to the Division of Pensions and Benefits for removal of improper credits, and these are just rules that were being ignored by local government officials, and it's a very simple question to ask. Which of your employees are in the pension system? Give me a list of all people in the pension system. And when you get the list, and you see that one of the names is a partner at, you know, the law firm of Cheatham and Rip 'em Off, or whatever the is named. You know, yeah, there you go, Cheatham and Howe, there you go. You know, be sure to ask those follow-up questions. Because we estimate there are hundreds of ineligible individuals, so we got to keep the pressure on. Let me talk about one last area, and then I'll wrap up, because I know we've got a full slate here tonight. You know, in talking about things like healthcare coverage and pension eligibility, these are big money issues, but they can be complicated, and the reform doesn't always happen as quickly as we would like. So I want to end with one more example of something that's very, very simple to ask and look into when you're interacting with our elected officials at the local government level. Find out if your local governments are paying for phone lines that are no longer being used. You know, I know to some people it sounds a little silly, but we asked that question of the state's Office of Information Technology. That's the office that oversees telephone usage for all state government employees. So we asked how many phone lines were not being used, and then we checked the usage report on every single one of those phone lines. And what we ultimately found is that the state had been paying for more than 19,000 phone lines that hadn't been used in the previous 6 months. They hadn't been used, and the agencies in question confirmed that those lines were no longer needed. And those lines were costing the state over $3 million a year. Those 19,000 phone lines works out to about 1 out of every 6 phone lines in state government was being paid for and not being used. Over the years, people had left employment. The size of state government has shrunk over the years, but the phone lines never got disconnected. The state, since the issuance of our report, the state has disconnected those lines. Those savings are being had. But that's a question that, going back to the more than 1,900 units of government in this state, all of you can be asking those questions of many of those government entities. And it's a simple question with some startling results. So that's a sample of some of the questions that you can ask, that we've asked, to make sure that our elected officials are putting taxpayers first. If you care to visit our website, you can look at our reports, maybe get some additional ideas as well. And I know, as Harry mentioned, you got some good literature tonight to mull over as well. Along the way, feel free to ask us any questions that you may have, or share information that you found. We can continue to work together, as we do with the Citizens Campaign, on an ongoing basis. We have a hotline that is manned by our investigators all through the working day. The number is 855-OSC-TIPS, if any of you have any information you'd like to share. So I'll close by thanking all of you in this room once again for making this commitment to be an active part of making New Jersey a more affordable place to live. I know that our state will be better for your efforts, and so I thank you very much.